Today we're at the 75th annual Grand National Roadster Show, and we're here with Adam from Rad Rides by Troy. Now, I'm going to introduce you to Adam. He's the man who is very responsible for this 1936 Ford Roadster that's in competition. And tell us a little bit about the car, but tell us what you do at Rad Rides,
okay.
where you fit in.
Yeah, I'm
Come on over here.
Thanks, and I've worked for Troy since 2004.
Right.
As far as this car is concerned, I kind of was there from the very beginning of this project as far as design. Ross had an idea of doing a 36 Ford Roadster and asked us if we'd like to do one fenderless. And I was pretty excited about that idea, showed him a side profile drawing, and he set us loose from there. So I was involved on design into things, and then fabrication all the way through, and ultimately on final assembly and interior work.
Effectively, it's a 1936 Ford Roadster, but it isn't. Give us an overview of just the major modifications.
Sure. Cliff notes.
Yeah, give us the cliff notes.
Okay. As far as a 36 Ford is concerned, coupe, roadster, whatever, they're beautiful cars with the fenders on, but with them off, they look a little like a bumblebee, I always say. And so a big part of that is how do we change the proportions of the 36 where we can run it fenderless and still have those proportions look nice. So we know that the 33, 34 Ford looks great with the fenders off. So what needs to happen on something 35 and later to do the same thing? So on this car, we can start at the front, and the grille is laid back a few degrees. It's also chopped at the bottom by 4.5. And then moving back, the cowl has been moved back 9.5 inches, but its door length is essentially the same as stock.
Yeah.
The 36 Ford had a much longer quarter panel on it, but moving the cowl and the door back into the quarter panel, we lost all the length in the front of that, but left the cockpit about where it was stock in relationship to the rear axle.
Did the cockpit expand any? Or
the cockpit didn't expand, it was just all moved back, so the seat is now moved back that same 9 inches with the cowl. So your foot space is still the same, the door length is still the same, but now effectively you have a longer front end and a shorter rear end, bobbed the back and kind of squared off the corners more like an earlier car. And then, aesthetically, a few things with the grille, laying it back and having a fully shrouded grille like that, more like a truck, lended itself more to an earlier style car as well. Because the grille moved back so that it was centered a little bit more in the axle in the front, the hood didn't end up being exponentially longer than stock, but just a few inches longer.
Okay.
That's the shortened version of
No,
what
I
we did.
get it.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the chassis. Is that just a clean piece of paper?
Yep.
When you started?
Yeah. So we used that original, Ross did send an original 36 Roadster to us, and I used it to pattern everything for building the body on the car. We built the body for the car, grille and everything first, and used that to dictate what the shape of the chassis was going to be, which is a little bit backwards, but because we're changing so many proportions, the width is the same as a stock 36. Wheelbase is a little bit different, but you're moving things around, so you can't use a 36 chassis because where it starts pinching at the front is now in a completely different location. So once the body was done, then we could start on the chassis.
Okay. Tell me about what's happening with the windshield. I mean, it looks like an old style DeVault type windshield and top, but tell me what you did there.
Yep. Again, to lend back to the design of an original 36 Ford, the posts on the outside of the windshield are actually just stylized after an original Roadster 36. What we've changed on it is they're laid back probably 5 or 6 degrees from the stock car. They're about 3 inches shorter, so it's effectively a 3-inch chop. And then we incorporated the stems for the rearview mirrors at the same time. Knowing that it was going to have a lift-off top early on, we needed a place to land that on there. So the top of the glass just has a little channel that the seal can land against. And we designed the center post to match that same style as the outside one. The original 36 Ford had a flat windshield. We did a split windshield. Just to kind of change the design a little bit and lean into the shape of that cowl a little more.
Okay. Now on the hood, well, there's nothing 36 here as far as the hood. But tell us basically what's going on. But what I really want you to explain, because that fascinated me, when you look at the engine, you see the air cleaner, and it looks like the air cleaner is jammed up against the hood side panel.
Yep.
But it's not. You've made it so that the hood side panel is part of the air intake.
Yes.
So just tell us about the air cleaner and hood side panel.
Yeah, so the hood side panels come completely off. They hook into the top of the splash pan at the bottom and then latch to these 2 pins at the top. And in doing that, it actually moves the hood side panel right against that air cleaner. And on the inside of the hood panel where the louvers are, there's a box that's bolted in, and that seals against the latches that are on the air cleaner. So we have a hump hose there that's to the back of the supercharger to isolate that vibration from the engine from the hood side. But now all the fresh air is coming from those louvers in the original style of a 36 Ford hood side louver.
Okay.
And then the handle that's on the hood side lifts up, runs a mechanism inside, and that's what actually releases the top. So you can open up the top to look in there or remove the whole side at the same time.
Tell us a little something about the steering box and what I would call old style steering, because it's out through the side of the hood.
Yep.
What do we got going on here?
Yeah, so this is actually a box that CPP currently sells, and we ordered this from them. They use this box a lot for a lot of their retrofit things. The one that we ordered, I think, is for an F100, and the ratio was going to be good. Obviously, that depends on arm length and that sort of thing, but we positioned it where it is now so that we could get the point that trailing arm for the steering comes back to a converging angle to where the wishbone is. So if those 2 points meet back there, you don't get the bumps.
Yeah, right. There we go.
That's the biggest advantage to having that arm as low as it is to try to get those points in line so that as that straight axle goes through its swing based on that you stay in line with that and you don't get the bump steering.
Tell me about the radius rods then. Get into the radius rods and what's happening up front.
Okay.
Yeah, tell me there.
So this car has torsion bar suspension front and rear.
Okay.
And so we designed these radius rods so that they attach to the axle similarly to how a split wishbone would or a regular radius rod. But what we did was incorporated our shackle mount into that radius rod so that we could run like a legitimate shackle and run our arm for the torsion bar out to pick that up. The radius arm we designed it ourselves, but we're playing off of some of the components of other things that are on the car. So the housing for that supercharger has some of those like fins in it that are incorporated into that. We did that on the air plenum, but also on those trailing arms.
Now I noticed the shock absorber, and this was a fun piece in one of the articles. The shock absorber top mount is integral with the headlight.
Yes.
It actually goes into the headlight.
Yep. So when we made the splash pans on this in the grill shell, they come down very close to the front horn of the frame. And so the headlight bucket has a solid billet piece in it, and the bracket for the shock bolts to that billet that holds the headlight and the shock mount on at the same time. And then the shock passes through the back of the bucket and bolts to that mount. So essentially you're bolting it to the frame itself.
Okay. Walk me out from the spindle out. What's happening from the spindle out?
So we wanted to design a drum cover. That's not a new concept. People have done that many times before. We wanted to do something that looked appropriate.
Because you have a disc brake. You have a disc brake in there.
So it's a Willwood 4-piston caliper and sort of a space saver type rotor in there. So it's an 11-inch rotor, 4-piston caliper, all housed within that brake drum. And again, we tried to design that to make it look like it was appropriate with the wheel and the other mechanical components of the car.
You mentioned the wheel. Tell me about the wheels.
So we wanted to do something that kind of call back to that wide 5 that the 36 had, the wide 5 bolt pattern. So we knew that we wanted to do something like that. And sort of a funny story, I was looking at sort of mid-century race magnesium wheels online and trying to come up with something, okay, we want to do something kind of along those lines. And I came across the backside of a magnesium wheel. I don't know what brand it was or anything like that, and had these big square fins on it, but they were very exaggerated and on the backside of a wheel. I thought, well, that looks kind of interesting. What if we do a stylized version of that on the front and bring those down into where that wide 5 pattern is? So we actually worked with Consuming Air, and he actually worked on the wheels with us, mostly because our machinist who does all of our modeling was so busy with some Bonneville stuff. And I worked with Jake on the design, and he spent a lot of time fine-tuning that, and he did the brakes as well on the car.
Okay, and now what's the rubber that we've got up front?
They're Excelsior Stall Sports radials.
Okay, and
from Coker.
Looks like you buffed them.
Yeah, we sent them the Diamondback tires that do all the white walls and just say, can you carve the letters off the side? And they did all of it for us.
Okay, well, that's
so good tip for anybody else wanting to do that.
Right. Now, let's start with the radiator. So tell me about the cooling, then get me into the motor. What's going on there?
We've made our own radiators for a number of years. We use I can't remember what it was C&R cores originally, PWR or something now. So we use their core and we machine our upper and lower tank. We have way more ability to do something custom where our necks are going to be. By doing it that way, we can also do screw-in fittings. So if you have tight fits so that you can service it easier, drop it out the bottom, drop it out the top. So we made the radiator ourselves. It has a pusher fan on the front, electric fan on it, and then shrouding to block off the radiator from the grill shell itself. As far as the accessories on the car, Lawrence, our machinist, designed and machined all those components in-house. So it's a 312 Y block with a McCulloch supercharger, VR57 supercharger. The internals of the supercharger have been retrofit with modern Paxton internals, but we made all of the bracketry ourselves. That goes into custom ductwork feeding the air plenum that we also designed and machined, as well as the intake that we previously talked about.
Now, tell me about, I can't help but stare at this exhaust manifold.
Yeah.
And I've caught everyone looking at it.
Yep.
This is really a pretty trick. In fact, it might be called over the top.
Of course, yeah.
What is going on with that exhaust manifold?
So Troy and I talked a number of times about what we wanted to do with the exhaust. If we wanted to do a more traditional manifold, or do we want to do a header on it? I had mentioned to him at one point, what if we did a log style manifold, exhaust manifold, and drop it out the front and have it loop around like a big loop, like a Vincent motorcycle. I always kind of like that look. Because of the space where it kicks back, you don't really get to see that very well once the splash pan's on. But I like the idea of having it come to the front. We had a lot more clearance in the back where the oil filter and all those things are.
Well, let's move over here and talk about the interior. Okay, let's start with the dashboard.
Yep.
Now, I remember when we were doing the story on the interior and whatnot, you just start. What the heck did you guys do there?
Well, sort of a funny story is the gauges were the first thing I bought for the project. We had brought the original car to the shop before we started in on this. And we had another car we were servicing in the shop, a 50 Buick, and I really liked the gauges in it and thought they looked older than a 50 Buick. And so I ended up finding a set online, and that was the first thing that I bought for this project. So they sat on the shelf for a long time until we got to that. But we used the 50 Buick gauges, really loved the depth of them, and it just worked out for the instruments that we needed for this car. We designed and machined the bezels around it, and I did a wood form, a tracing form for Pullmax to stamp the dash so that it matched the machine piece that we did on it. Other features inside, as far as the dash steering, we're using a Roadster tilt steering column that Rad Rides Performance Parts manufactures and sells now. This is the first car that we finished, done start to finish, that we've used that column in. We also designed the steering wheel and machined it. And then the badge on the steering wheel is the same as the hubcaps, and that was an interesting process we can touch on as well.
What about the shifter? What's going on here?
It's a low car shifter, and it's something we've used on lots of different things. Automatic transmission.
It's a
4R70W.
Yeah. Now, tell me a little bit about the doors, because I see what look like pockets.
Yeah.
So they must be cut reliefed into the door.
Yeah. So there's a pocket that goes inside the door. It's almost the depth of the door itself, and so those pockets, they have a knob on them that latches that pocket. But the little cutaway at the back actually is a relief for the seat bolster. Okay. So if you're inside the car, you could still open it up without it hitting the seat itself.
Now, before we get back in the interior, I've got to backtrack a little bit. This car has catalytic converters.
Yes.
I'm looking at that. So tell me about the exhaust tubing, the pipe, and the muffler and the catalytic converter.
Yeah, we bought a Lammerflow muffler that has cones on the inside for the baffling. And we used those, and we made our own cases for the mufflers and the catalytic converters. So we bought both of those, used a different stainless material that didn't turn blue, essentially, and made our own cases, and then stamped the ends so that the catalytic converter and the muffler themselves both matched one another aesthetically as well.
Okay.
But the catalytic converters we've run on almost everything we built, whether it's a street rod, street machine, whatever. Not necessarily for emissions where we're from, but it does help with the smell of the car when you're driving around. We like the tone of the car when it has to pass through there, and pairing it up with these mufflers, the car sounds really, really good.
Okay. Now, getting back on the interior, tell me about the bench seat and what's going on there.
A big part of the comfort of an interior, at least in our opinion, is ergonomically, how does the car feel? And in a lot of cases with the street rod, there seems to be something that's in the way, whether it's the shift or whether the pedal position, steering column, those sort of things. When we're building everything from scratch, we have the ability to put those things in place where they need to be. So when you're talking about the bench seat, it's another part of that. We can put the height of the bench seat where we want to. We're making all our own frames, adding all our own springs, building the foam, all of that to get the driver's seating position where his line of sight is as good as possible for the height of the car.
Let's walk around over here because I want you to tell me about the top. The top on this is amazing. So tell me what, well, you start at the beginning and
Sure.
Tell us about the top.
When we're designing the top on this thing, the first time we had to really consider what the shape of it was going to be beyond, okay, we want to have a lift-off top on it. Part of that was wanting it to look like a coupe as far as the profile, and when you have a folding top, typically on these cars it has two bows in it, and you don't really get that full arc like a coupe has. So we did it as a lift-off top, and I made some cross sections, just some cardboard pieces when we were determining the windshield angle and height early on in the project. And then those pieces were sort of set aside until I got back to the top itself.
Is the glass fixed? The rear glass, is that
Rear
a
glass
fixed
is fixed.
piece
Yep.
of glass?
Yep.
Okay.
And so the bezel, the garnish molding on the inside and the bezel on the outside bolt together and sandwich it in there, and then it's got a seal around it.
Okay. You upholstered this, didn't you?
Yeah.
Okay, I got to ask you, is there anything you can't do on the car?
I'm sure there is, but
Well,
we all have our strengths and weaknesses.
what was it like upholstering that top?
That was probably the more nerve-wracking parts of the whole car for me, because once it's patterned, I knew it lined up with where the seams needed to be.
Yeah.
But when you're actually applying it on there, there's not much room for error. The seams need to land where they are, and you don't obviously want to get any wrinkles in between each of those when you're gluing it to the aluminum.
Yeah. We talked about the headlights earlier, but tell me about the taillights. What's going on there?
I went through probably 3 or 4 different taillights that I thought might work well, and I had everything from Lincoln taillights, all sorts of things, Corvette stuff, and everything was too big for the area, or not quite the right shape or whatever. And what I ended up finding were these Lucas taillights, and stylistically, they're very similar to a early mid-50s Ford front driving light, where they have the little crosshair fins in them. So these are a Lucas European taillight lens. They use these, I believe, on some ACs, the AMBR ones on Cobras, that sort of thing. And they're about a 3-inch taillight. And we ended up making the bezel to let it sink in there. And we left it all polished so that it can reflect the light off of the housing itself.
Okay.
They actually are very bright taillights.
Now, I know we talked about the front suspension earlier.
Mhm.
Let's get into the rear suspension, which is based on a quick change, is it not?
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me what's happening there.
So it's a Winners Champion quick change. So it's their larger ring gear quick change, and it's custom with. It's also torsion bar in the back with a larger sway bar, and we ran the sway bar and torsion bar arms parallel to each other. They're linked with a 3-bolt link down to a dog bone, so they share a single link going down to the axle in the back.
Okay.
Very similar brake setup in the back, a little bit different drum to accommodate the parking brakes, but very similar. It's like a split wishbone style suspension in the back.
Tell us about the paint. What's going on here?
Yeah,
colors.
believe it or not, I saw the color painted on a car that Rod Emery out here in California did a few years ago. It's a later model, Adventure in Green Porsche color. And the only difference we did on the paint code was changing it to all fine metallic versus a medium.
Okay.
And that just seemed, the tone of the color seemed to work out better with our upholstery and leather materials.
Now, something I get a kick out of is the license plate back here. You look at it, it looks like a vintage plate,
Yeah.
and it's patinaed and all that.
Yep.
But I'm not buying that.
No,
no.
no.
Hey, tell us about the license
so
plate.
Ross's shop where he has this car collection is called Three Dog Garage, and so the license plate says 3DG36. So Three Dog Garage 36. I had bought a vintage 36 license plate, Pennsylvania license plate, which is where he's from. The size of the plate was excellent for what I was doing on the roll pan, and we used that for mock-up and fabrication and hauling the car around and everything. Well, we machined this plate to have the right fonts and everything else, and then we sent it to Austin.
So it's brand new.
Yep, Austin Poland at Poland Designs, and he patinaed it to look exactly like that original plate.
You look at the car and you go, oh my God, that's the original license plate for that car. It's great.
Funny note, I guess, just for novelty, I did keep the original interior door handles from the car that Ross sent us.
Oh.
Everything else is new.
Well, congratulations.
Well, I appreciate it,
That was an
Brian.
amazing car.
Thank you. Appreciate it.